Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming to check out our February meeting focused on deconstruction, our first meeting of 2022. And I just realized this is probably the CLF Rocky Mountain Hub's second birthday because of the few of you I got to meet in person in 2020. We met right before everything shut down for the pandemic. So happy birthday, CLF Rocky Mountain. But a quick overview of our agenda. Right now we're in the welcome phase. Then we'll have presentations from Anna Perks, who owns and runs her own deconstruction company, and Shawn Wood, who's a deconstruction and waste specialist in the city of Portland, which has one of the best, if not the best, deconstruction code in the US. So we're really excited for kind of the dichotomy of the discussion on what's happening here locally in Colorado, what Portland has done that's been so successful, and maybe how we can bring those lessons here. As always, we want to leave a healthy 20-30 minutes for Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout, but we'll have plenty of time to address anything in the chat that's not addressed or any other questions you might have at the end. So if you've been to one of our meetings before, you've seen this slide. Victoria, who's on the call, myself and Jim Mellentine are the three co-chairs who started this hub 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. And so we're volunteers working to better organize people who are interested in and practicing embodied carbon reductions in the local community. Since COVID, we've been much more open to expanding these webinars to anyone who's interested, because really we're all about education and driving impact where possible. So most of our webinars have focused on education, with some sessions focused on what action we can take locally through policy or other means. A lot of you are familiar with the Carbon Leadership Forum. It's an industry academic collaboration hosted at the University of Washington that has kind of a growing scope and a growing staff, which is really exciting. They're putting out more research and more briefs day by day. And then the Rocky Mountain Hub is kind of a local group that seeks to disseminate a lot of that information and see what we can do to help the local community of practitioners. Our contact info is up here. I can also drop this in the chat while Anna and Shawn are speaking later, just so that you have these links handy, or if you want to share our mailing list information out to anyone who's not here. So I'll give a brief introduction to Anna and Shawn, who are joining us. While I do that, I'm going to stop sharing so that Anna can get all set up, because we know that technical difficulties always occur on Zoom. Anna with Perks Deconstruction is the owner and key operator of Perks Deconstruction. She's driven by the pursuit of offering more sustainable building and demolition options in the Denver metro region. She works to increase awareness and education, which is why she's here today. And she works to help construction and demolition professionals incorporate salvaging, donating, reusing, and repurposing building materials as much as possible. She's a Colorado College graduate, so a true local to us here. And Shawn is the construction waste specialist with the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Like I mentioned, they have one of the most successful deconstruction programs in the country here. His work involves finding ways to reduce material waste associated with construction and demolition of buildings. So not just applying those policies that exist, but finding different ways to reduce waste in the construction of buildings. And a lot of his work includes the promotion and facilitation of constructing space-efficient accessory dwellings, which provide flexibility, financial benefits, and less material waste over the life cycle of a unit. So with that, Anna, are you able to share your screen and take over from here?
I believe so. Can you see my title screen?
Can you hit the swap displays? We've got the notes screen.
Swap displays.
Now
okay.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I'm happy to be here and happy to have the opportunity to share more about deconstruction. I'm going to take about 10 minutes to explain a little bit about deconstruction and highlight some projects that we've done in the last few months, and then I'll turn it over to Shawn Wood, and then he and I will take questions after that. A little bit about me. I live in Denver. I have about 10 years of experience in waste management, and I started Perks Deconstruction 3 years ago. And we have 5 employees and a network of independent contractors that work for us. And we're based in Denver, and we provide services around the Denver Boulder area. So I started the company after watching this historic house get torn down on Tennyson Street in West Denver. And I watched the demo crew bulldoze it, and appliances and all the historic features of the house just get trashed. And so I reached out to the developer of the project, and I learned really quickly that there weren't really other options, alternatives to demolition. There wasn't anybody doing deconstruction in the Denver area. And my first thought was, well, I'll be a consultant and I'll tell them to go deconstruct and what to do with the material. And then I realized, well, there's no one actually doing the deconstruction work. And so kind of before I knew it, I had a company doing deconstruction. And just in Denver, CDPHE's report, they estimate that about 30 to 40% of our landfill consists of construction and demolition debris. And of that, 90% is from demolition. So I started the company to show that we can be environmentally sustainable and provide good jobs and also be profitable. My long-term vision is to increase awareness around deconstruction. And then also I want to have some deconstruction competitors in Denver. So for those of you not familiar with deconstruction, it's the systematic dismantling and removal of a structure or its parts to salvage and harvest the components with the purpose of reusing and or recycling these reclaimed materials and commodities for their maximum value. And so when you compare deconstruction to demolition, the main difference is that deconstruction's goal is to maximize the recovery of things like cabinets, doors, appliances, lumber, and then whatever you can't reuse, you recycle. Some building industry stats that I think are helpful to share. 50% of material resources taken from nature are building related. 40% of carbon dioxide emissions in the world are building related, and building stock is anticipated to double by 2060. There are, of course, a lot of solutions being posed to help us build better, such as certifications like LEED or Life Cycle Building Challenge. There's also the idea of actually designing for deconstruction, so that at the end of a building's life, it can easily be taken apart and the materials can be salvaged for reuse. So that involves things like not using as much glue everywhere. And there's also talk around reduce and recycling, and more specifically around decreasing waste at its source and increasing the lifespan of consumables, and a growing awareness around deconstruction. So there's different types of levels of deconstruction. There's selective deconstruction. It's where you cherry pick certain items to be salvaged in the house. It can be structural or non-structural. There's also partially mechanized, panelized, hybrid deconstruction. This is a picture at one of our job sites where we salvaged over 45 trusses using a telescope forklift. There's also panelized deconstruction, where you take off an entire wall or section of a building and disassemble it right there, or you can haul it to a warehouse and disassemble it at the warehouse. If you're familiar with modular building, it's essentially the opposite of that. And there's also full house deconstruction, where you take apart a house in the reverse order that it was built. You're unbuilding the house. Generally, when we do this, we aim to divert at least 75% of the house from the landfill. So starting the deconstruction process, we always start with a job site walk. I will walk the job with the contractor or with the homeowner, and at that point, I'm understanding the scope of the job, what's going to get removed, and I'm also taking a lot of pictures and creating a waste plan. So based on that waste plan, I'm able to figure out how much it's going to cost us to do the work. I send the bid to the contractor, and then we're hired to do the work. And what we do is more surgical and more careful than bulldozing or using a sledgehammer. So sometimes it can increase the cost of the service, not in every case, but sometimes. So to help offset that additional cost, we will donate the materials to nonprofits. And then we help connect the homeowner to an appraisal group so that they can claim a charitable tax contribution and receive tax deductions. In this slide, I showed what the waste donation salvage list looks like that Resource does, nonprofit in Boulder. And they'll do this for free. Anyone in Boulder County, they'll go to your project and they'll create a list of items that they will accept. And then they'll give it to the contractor or homeowner. And then I usually get it. And then our team knows what we can remove and salvage for the nonprofit. I also, just for fun, included some pictures from a project we completed last week, interior salvage job, a lot of insulation, Trex decking, cabinets, etc. So real quickly here, I'll go over a couple projects that we've done in the last year and a half or so to give you an idea of impact. So this is a house that was built in the 1980s. It was 7,000 square feet. It took us 38 days with a team of 5 to fully disassemble the house. We diverted 125,000 pounds of material from the landfill, and 91,500 pounds of that material that we diverted was wood. Overall, it was a 50%, 52% diversion rate. We left the foundation. It'll get removed and recycled in hopefully this summer, and then that will increase that overall diversion rate. The homeowners were really interested in reusing materials on this job site. They were located down in Greenwood Village, so they weren't required to deconstruct, but they were driven by their own sustainable values, and then also were able to receive a tax deduction. So all the red cedar from their house, they built over 20 garden beds from. We removed a lot of lumber for them, and we denailed it and processed it and left about 60% of it for them to reuse. We also had a lot of insulation, windows, garage doors, structural I-beams, a lot of different material that came out. Because it was from the 1980s, there were some cabinets and vanities that couldn't get accepted by local nonprofits. So the biggest salvage value in this house would have been the lumber. In the recap, homeowners paid about 3 times more for deconstruction. I estimated, after we took all the linear footage of all the lumber that we denailed and left them, that it was about a $40,000 value in lumber that we denailed and left them. And then they received tax deductions for this project, and they were around $20,000. So combining those two benefits, they definitely save some money in the long run. Here's another project. Last one was 1980s. This is 1880s. This was in the city of Boulder. We were required to deconstruct it. It was a 2,300 square foot house. It took us 30 days to deconstruct this one. We diverted 115,000 pounds of material from the landfill. Of that, 18,000 pounds of it was wood. And overall, it was a 78% diversion rate. We got a lot of great old growth wood from the 1880s out of that one, and bagged up a lot of bad insulation. And then also we palletized a lot of the brick the homeowners wanted to reuse for their new construction project. And then we also, the brick that they didn't want, we took to have it be used as backfill for another project. Our costs for this project were 4 times more than a traditional demo company. The homeowner will likely get around a $20,000 to $30,000 tax deduction, which then makes it about a break-even financial scenario for them. Last one is, this is an interior remodel project. Unfortunately, there are quite a few homes out there that get remodeled to be sold, and the new homeowner doesn't like any of the new finishes that they just bought for the house. So they ask for it to all be gutted. So in this case, we were hired to remove doors, cabinetry, demo the bathrooms, remove the flooring. We took about 10 days with a team of 4 people, and all the materials that we donated out of that were appraised at over $100,000, equating to about a $35,000 tax deduction for the homeowner. And our cost to deconstruct was a lot less. So the homeowner made money in that case. And in those 10 days, we saved about 23,000 pounds of material from the landfill. And I'm proud to report, since I started the company, we've diverted over 1 million pounds of land material from the landfill. There's, of course, a lot of challenges of what we do. Unfortunately, there's just not enough end markets for a lot of materials like drywall, asphalt shingles, painted wood, wood with glue. Also, building codes need to allow for reclaimed lumber to be more widely used. It's allowed as long as a structural engineer puts a stamp on it, but structural engineers don't want to take that risk, even though the lumber is much stronger, more resistant to decay. I'll let Shawn Wood share more about Oregon and Washington and what they've done around creating building codes to allow for reuse. But also another challenge is just the industry generally lacks serious investment in reuse culture, from end markets to contractors to consumer behavior. And then there's just a lack of awareness. Most people are genuinely surprised that we can donate and recover the materials that we do. And we just finished a project yesterday, and the homeowner came home and looked at the flooring that we de-nailed and saved. And he's like, "Oh my God, you guys are crazy. I can't believe you can save this stuff." And that is 95% of the people that we work with. They're just really surprised of the material that we can save. We have a lot of great nonprofit partners for donation. Bud's Warehouse and Resource will actually send out a box truck to collect material from our job sites, and they'll haul it to be donated. And then there's also several markets for recycling material. All metals are easy to recycle. Dimensional lumber that's not painted or treated, we can either donate, or we can send it to be chipped up and used as mulch. They'll run a magnet over it and pull the nails out. And then any brick or concrete can be sent to the recycler, and it'll be used as road aggregate. I'll end there. I'm a little over my 10 minutes, but this is my contact information and my website, and would love for anyone to reach out and make a connection. And I'll take some questions once after Shawn is done talking. Stop sharing here.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Anna. And I know you're going to speak a little bit to some of our local codes again after Shawn as well. So it looks like, Shawn, your sharing is good to go, and I'll pass it over.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Anna, for that great overview of just what deconstruction is. That's awesome, because then I can just launch right into showing you what Portland does. So again, I'm Shawn Wood with the City of Portland. I work for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I've been in this position as a construction waste specialist for about 10 years. And let's see. All right. And in Portland, if you went back in time 100+ years ago, there were these ancient forests standing in the Pacific Northwest, and most of our houses kind of pre-war were built with old growth lumber. And so Anna mentioned that they were able to salvage some stuff from an 1880s house. That's what these older houses are built with, old growth lumber that's tight grain. That 2x4 there in the lower right hand corner has over 100 years of growth rings in it. So just less than 4 inches, 100 years. And that is kind of the main driver of what we're doing here in Portland. And pre-1916, this was the predominant way that a house came down in Portland. So just like Anna said, how she got started in all of this after witnessing a demolition. When this particular demo, this is probably 2014 that this demolition happened. At the time, I remember taking pictures of it and thinking to myself, this is going to be the poster child for demolition and a rallying cry for deconstruction. And I've been using this image in my slideshow for 6 years. So it has turned into kind of the poster child. And then after 2016, the predominant way for taking down houses in Portland is deconstruction. And I'll explain why here in a moment. So we've kind of fundamentally changed how houses come down in Portland. And it really kind of got kicked off for us around 2013, 2014. So this is a graph showing annual demolition permits for houses in Portland. And during the during the recession, the number of permits troughed, and then coming out of the Great Recession, we started to see a really large increase in the number of house demolitions, and that was noticed by kind of me in my department, just pulling permit data and talking to some salvage and deconstruction companies that were in Portland at the time, and we confirmed it, and a lot of people in the neighborhoods were noticing it as well. So it wasn't just, this trend that we saw in a permit database. Folks were seeing these houses come down. 5+ years ago, you could get a demolition permit over the counter, so same day, and that afternoon you could be tearing it down. So a neighbor could literally go to work and come home, and the house next door was gone, and there was a pile of dust everywhere. So there's a fair amount of, opposition to demolitions in Portland, and neighbors started to become active. That lower right-hand image, the most interesting thing might appear to be the goat, but if you look beyond the goat on that dormer of that house, there's a guy chained to the roof. That's an active demolition. The front porch had already been demolished, and they're protesting the removal of that kind of lower H historic home. And the neighborhood started to get organized. So it wasn't just, coming out and protesting, yard signs, demolition forums, website exposés on, houses that were coming down and who the developer was. And so we started going to those demolition forums and talking about deconstruction as an alternative to demolition. And we started to really gain public support for doing something different in Portland. And, year-long conversation and advocacy ultimately led to our city council directing my Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, to convene an advisory group for deconstruction and come back to them, I think within like 3 months, with ideas to advance deconstruction in the city of Portland. So our first meeting was in April of 2015, and we had about 20 some members of this advisory group that included, home builders, demo contractors, neighborhood advocates, historic preservation advocates, the existing salvage and deconstruction industry, so both for-profit and nonprofit and retailers. And then also our permitting staff. And we met probably a total of 25 times, but kicked it off in April of 2015. And this is over the course of 5+ years, but as an advisory group, as a body, we agreed that let's start with a voluntary incentive-based approach first. So we went to city council, asked for funds for a grant program, and that kicked off in 2015, kind of August of 2015. And then the following year in 2016, we were back and said, we did this grant program. Now we're ready to move into kind of the second phase, which would be requirements, but we want to phase those in over time. We want them to ramp up over time as the industry expands and matures and can take on more projects. So in 2016, we launched our Deconstruction Ordinance, which is a requirement that a house or duplex, if it's in for a demolition permit and it was built in 1916 or earlier, or if it's designated historic, regardless of age, it has to be fully deconstructed. And then we had a goal of raising that year built threshold to 1940 by 2019. We were able to expand it in 2020, so we just narrowly missed it. But that's where we're at today. So any house in Portland built 1940 or earlier it comes down, it has to be deconstructed. This was the kind of just an overview of the grant program. We had little like $2,500, $3,000 grants that we gave out for deconstruction projects. And probably the biggest advantage was we were kind of paying money for information. So we're encouraging deconstruction, we're helping it along, but we were able to gain a fair amount of information so that when we went back to city council to make the argument for requiring deconstruction, we had information on how much it cost. How much did it cost compared to mechanical demolition? How many labor hours went into the project? And then it also was a proving ground for elements that ultimately ended up in our deconstruction ordinance. So like the signage, turning in receipts for materials at the end, all of those were components of the grant program that ultimately ended up in our deconstruction ordinance. And so again, initially 1916 or older was the threshold for required deconstruction. We expanded that in 2020 to 1940. So that original 1916 threshold captured about a third of all house demo permits in Portland. And then taking it to 1940 captures essentially another third. So today we capture 2/3 of house demo permits in Portland. And this might seem like a boring slide at first, but it fascinates me. And I'll tell you why. So in 2016, that's the first year the deconstruction ordinance went into effect October. So we didn't have a whole lot of projects that fell under the ordinance. So might be hard to see the orange bar total demo permits, and then the green line is the subset of deconstruction projects within the total number of demo permits. In 27, so remember 1916, that first year built threshold captures roughly a third of projects. So we look at 2017, we didn't quite capture a third, it's 28%. And likely the reason for that is folks turned in their demo permit applications before the ordinance went into effect to kind of beat the clock and be vested in the old code. So we see a little bit of trickery there. So we don't quite reach the full third. 2018, that's the full year that, you know, no one's doing stuff in advance. We're right around a third. 2019, again, the threshold hasn't changed, should capture a third, but we capture 42%. And so why is that? When I look at those numbers, a third of the projects were required deconstructions. That remaining 8% were voluntary projects. So that means they didn't, those developers did not have to do deconstruction. They chose to do it. And I can guarantee you that the reason was the cost was competitive. And there's something else that happened in mid 2018 that started to change the math with the cost of deconstruction versus demolition. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then in 2020, we raised the year built threshold to 1940. That should capture 2/3, and that's exactly what we see for 2020 and 2021. It's super consistent, that year built and the number or the percentage of houses that come down in that age bracket. Over the past 5+ years, we've deconstructed, the contractors that do this work, over 400 houses. That's been over 4 million pounds of just lumber. We track lumber. We don't track the other materials, and that's recovered for reuse. So I emphasize reuse, not recycling, not burning for energy recovery, not landfill, for reuse. And the average is about 4,000 board feet per house of lumber that's coming out of these. And we know through working with our State Department of Environmental Quality that the carbon benefit for each deconstructed house compared to a mechanical demolition scenario equates to about 7.6 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That's the carbon benefit for each house. So that's equivalent to taking 700 cars off the road for a year to date. There's hazardous material benefits with deconstruction. So it produces a lot less dust. It's more surgical. It's very frequent that deconstruction contractors find unabated asbestos in the walls or under cabinets. Even though an asbestos survey and abatement has occurred, work stops, the material is safely removed, and then work begins again. The deconstruction ordinance, and this could be a whole other topic, but because of the deconstruction ordinance and its kind of best practice approach to hazardous materials, the city of Portland ended up adopting additional requirements for mechanical demolition. So you can no longer just show up with an excavator and smash a house. You have to hand remove all the exterior painted siding, windows, doors, anything that's non-structural and painted pre-1978 has to be removed by hand. And then there's wetting requirements. So that added a fair amount of additional labor for mechanical demo permits. That kicked off in July 2018. And so that's where we start to see an increase in the cost of mechanical demolition. Meanwhile, because of competition and innovation, we're seeing lower costs for deconstruction. There's economic benefits. There's more people working on these jobs, deconstruction contractors, fabricators, retailers. We've got 17 certified deconstruction contractors now in Portland. And like I said, the cost has come down for deconstruction while mechanical has gone up. We're also doing things to try and support the demand side for salvage materials. We've got a new zoning code incentive that essentially it's a point-based system. You get a couple of points for using salvaged wood. Anna alluded to this earlier. Both Oregon and Washington have amended our building codes to allow for ungraded, unstamped, used lumber for structural purposes in new construction. So it just assumes a minimum grade in the absence of any grade stamp. And then we've been working with our city procurement department to get salvaged material into either furniture in our buildings or using salvaged lumber in new construction. And there's a couple of images of some tables that are in our brand new building that we've yet to occupy because of a pandemic. But that's essentially resawn salvaged plywood that's been cross-laminated, and it's amazingly beautiful stuff. 2 more slides. These are just examples from around Portland of how this material is getting used. So furniture, doors, sleeping pods, art. It's hard to go into a bar or a coffee shop in Portland and not see this material showcased. And then just lastly, Portland, as far as I know, was the first city to adopt an ordinance requiring deconstruction. But just like I'm doing right now, we've shared our story with other cities that are really interested in advancing deconstruction in their towns. And we've had a number of cities that have adopted ordinances or created advisory groups. There's executive orders like in Pittsburgh from the mayor, and various incentives and plans to develop a more robust deconstruction and salvage ecosystem in other cities. So this is just a sprinkling of all the different cities that are in various stages of pursuing this. But we've got Victoria, Vancouver, Milwaukee, Boise, they've all adopted deconstruction ordinances to one degree or another. So anyway, I'll end with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Shawn. And Anna, I think before we dive into Q&A, you wanted to chat a bit about the local landscape in Colorado, which I think gets right to one of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, so I kind of breezed over it, but so in Colorado, the city of Boulder requires deconstruction. They have a 75% diversion requirement, and they require a deposit be paid when you apply for your demo permit. It's $1 per square foot based on the size of your project. That can be refunded when you show your waste receipts and show that you met those diversion requirements. They've been kind of the leader around deconstruction. There's also Pitkin County around Aspen. So they don't have a deconstruction requirement, but they have a requirement or a deposit refund system requiring a minimum of 25% diversion rate. And so people choose to deconstruct to meet that requirement. Fort Collins also has an ordinance to require certain types of recycling. The city of Lakewood, I believe, just adopted language in their building code to require concrete to be recycled and cabinets to be salvaged. And then Denver, they Waste No More, the organization that put forward the sustainability tax. They're putting out a ballot initiative that will hopefully go on the ballot this fall. And it includes providing recycling and compost service for everyone in Denver. And it also has language around requiring construction and demolition deconstruction in Denver. And they're putting it forward as a ballot initiative. And the specific language of that one is on the Waste No More website. So yeah, we've got a growing awareness. I would say Denver, still is very much a deconstruction desert, but we are little by little, it's getting on their radar.
Perfect. And before I start reading out of the chat, I wanted to ask if either or both of you have any suggestions for what practitioners, so architects, structural engineers, MEP engineers, home builders, what they can do to encourage their clients to strive for deconstruction.
I always encourage, a lot of times architects are the first ones, or designers are the first ones to talk to the homeowners. And so as much as they can get it on the homeowner's mind of, okay, well, what could you reuse out of this project? If you can't reuse, are you willing to donate? So putting it on their radar.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And also just considering how a building comes down and then what goes up in its place as the full spectrum of green building. So we see a lot of focus on, oh, I'm building this new building and it's super energy efficient and it meets all these LEED and life cycle building challenge stuff. But how did the house come down that might have been on the site before this new really green building? And so if you're just focused on that new construction and not concerned about how that building comes down that was there first, you're not taking into the full account the environmental impacts.
Definitely. Yeah, kind of bringing in the whole life carbon aspect rather than just looking at the operational carbon of your new building.
Right.
Yep. So we're gonna move deeper into our Q&A here. So if folks are able to, please unmute your video just so we can say hi and feel a little more conversational. I'll keep reading down the list of questions from our chat here. And actually, since I see you popped up, Rod, do you want to start with your question about hazardous materials?
Thank you very much. You mentioned important some about that, but what is the process? I'm assuming it's early to identify how to deal with lead or asbestos, and then how do you take it out of the building before you do the rest of the deconstruction?
I can answer that for Portland. For us, all of our certified deconstruction contractors have their lead RRP certifications and at a minimum their asbestos inspector credential. So they're aware of the hazards. They know how to potentially identify them, test for them. But in Portland, before a demolition or a deconstruction occurs, there's several preventative measures that are put in place. So they have to have an asbestos survey and abatement completed before a demolition permit is even issued. So in theory, that material is gone. And then any work around lead, people are masked up and suited up. That material is wrapped in plastic, put into a lined dumpster, and then taken off site. So it's, like I said earlier, it's not uncommon to discover unabated asbestos on the project, but with deconstruction, you're faced with that. You're literally face to face with it. So you're gonna put some red spray paint around it, work stops in that area, abatement contractor comes out, safely removes that, then work resumes. That would not be the case with mechanical demolition. Someone in a cab of an excavator is not going to be able to see that remaining asbestos, and it's going to get churned up and potentially on a sort line at a recycling facility.
And on in Colorado, so in Boulder County, in order to get your demolition permit, you have to test for asbestos regardless of the age of the building. So before the demolition permit is approved, asbestos has to be tested for. We do not test. We don't do the abatement ourselves. Our contract requires that the asbestos is abated. My team has been trained on level 4 asbestos awareness, so they know what it looks like and where specific areas that might be likely to have it. And just like Shawn said, if we see it, then we stop, we call the contractor, then the abatement company comes back out and it gets removed. And our deconstruction company is also lead certified. And so, yeah, just don't create the lead dust, wear our masks, and use a HEPA vacuum to clean it up afterwards. So yeah, I think it's a huge, it is, I really am growing our business on how clean and organized we are. No one expects the deconstruction demo crew to be the cleanest subcontractor on the job site, but that's what it's all about. We're sorting all the materials as we go. We're keeping piles nice and clean, and we use dust extractors on the job site to reduce dust. And so, yeah, we find that it's a really clean process.
Great. Thank you both for that. I think, Victoria, that we answered your question about Colorado incentives and whatnot. I'll come back to you in a second, but Julie, do you want to ask your question about the commercial side?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm just wondering on the commercial side, so we don't do any single family homes, but we do a lot of commercial and multifamily work. So I guess I'm wondering what options are out there for commercial structures, because it's been really frustrating. Every single one of our projects, we talk to clients and they've practically got it demolished before we can even talk to them. And so it'd be great to have some resources. Also, as designers, we're really interested in designing buildings for deconstruction better. And I'm wondering if anybody has any good resources, any sort of guidebooks or anything that kind of really talks about all the different things to watch out for.
So we're definitely expanding into commercial. I'm certified as a woman business enterprise and minority business enterprise and disadvantaged business enterprise to take advantage of any sort of commercial contracts. The big challenge with commercial is that there's a lot more material. And so you have to find end markets for it. And really it's being that kind of material broker type of person, knowing where you can divert things. But commercial, there's a lot of, there's a ton of metal. It's usually not a wood frame building, so that is easily recyclable. Ceiling tiles can be sent to be recycled. So there's definitely opportunity. The very first project we did was for a commercial developer downtown in the Rhino district in Denver. And it was a furniture warehouse building. Our team went in for the first 3 days and salvaged the vinyl flooring. They had corrugated metal in each office and lumber or racks and staircases, all kinds of stuff. And the developer got a tax deduction for that one, and Resource came down from Boulder to pick up all the material. So I'd say, not every commercial project that we could handle, but there are definitely good candidates for it. And I'd be happy to work with you on any of that. And I'm curious, Shawn, if you have any good resources for architects. I wish I had better.
Yeah, I dropped a couple of links in the chat just for design for deconstruction and for architects. I know there's a couple that immediately came to mind. For commercial deconstruction, it's not anything that that we've codified for Portland. It's certainly something that we discussed as part of our advisory group and whether we wanted to tackle that. And I've been asked numerous times, like, are we going to expand into commercial? And for us, I think at this point in the game and with the demand for material, we're at capacity. So there's a fairly robust demand for the material that's coming out of these older houses. It's a much more challenging proposition to look at commercial material. And it's, for us, the houses were very homogeneous. They're stick built, 1940 or older. They're old growth. It's very predictable. It's easy to disassemble compared to a commercial structure that might be masonry or steel, concrete, much harder nut to crack. But I'm supporting anybody that wants to venture into that arena.
Yeah, I'll add that the city of Boulder, their deconstruction requirement applies to commercial and residential. So they are trying to make some moves on that side.
Palo Alto as well, both residential and commercial.
Anna, I don't know if this came up, but have you done a commercial deconstruction project yet? I guess you mentioned the furniture warehouse.
Yeah, we've done that one, and then just 3 others. They're tinier restaurant tenant space changes, but we did the demo for them. So came in and removed anything that could be salvaged and then demoed the rest.
Great.
I'll speak up here. So I'm Alexis Vitel. I'm a structural engineer at KLNA in the Denver Golden area, and we are working on a commercial deconstruction project now. So certainly not from like the material kind of brokerage side of it, but definitely from, you know, the structural side, and then you know, kind of implementation of those materials into new construction as well. And so I'll throw us out as a potential contact for you all.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thanks, Alexis. And while you're chatting, do you want to ask your question about recycled concrete as well?
Yeah, sure. I was just curious, you know, and I think you had mentioned that on most of your projects, the concrete was coming out and potentially being used for like fill, on other ones are being recycled. But I'm just curious, like kind of more specifically, like what avenues have you seen that concrete go? And yeah, I guess just kind of what end uses you've seen.
Yeah, so there's 4 major that we use, typically 4 major concrete recyclers around Denver, Golden, Boulder area, and they break it up and we'll use it as like road base. So that's kind of the main thing, and it's generally free to recycle. So instead of making your dumpster super heavy and trashing it, you can take it to any of those recyclers. Colorado Aggregate Recycling off of 93 north of Golden, Henderson Pit northeast of Denver, and then there's a few more up in Boulder. So any of those will take it, and they'll also take brick. They'll charge you if there's rebar in there, but very equipped to recycle it. And it just makes fiscal sense as a contractor too, to not pay to trash it.
Shawn, have you seen any other uses for recycled concrete in Portland, or much the
Yeah,
same?
no, just aggregate, and it's we don't have a requirement, but it would be foolish to take it to a transfer facility or landfill when it can be crushed for aggregate. So it's purely an economic decision. So for us, like anything related to deconstruction, we don't look at concrete at all. Like the deconstruction project essentially ends when they get down to the foundation, and then a mechanical demolition contractor with an excavator comes in, removes that, hauls it off, backfills, and compacts the basement.
Thanks. Victoria, I was going to pass it to you next.
Thank you. I kind of asked the question to Shawn, but I'm curious because Anna mentioned during her presentation that mostly is donations what you do. So kind of like, what is the best business model that you have found for deconstruction that it works in for the subcontractors or your own company, Anna, in your case? Is it more donation, or because at the end of the day, you have, like you said, like the broker kind of job of like where all this material goes. So warehouses, or where does this material go? Donations, retail? Yeah, like for both of you, question.
Yeah, so for Portland, I was actually wrote down a note to bring this up when I was listening to Anna's presentation. So in Portland, the tax deduction is not a major player in the economic scene of deconstruction. So in our environment, our most successful deconstruction contractors have their own retail warehouse / showroom. So they're selling that material directly at retail prices. So, you know, the other option is it could be donated, the owner gets a tax deduction, or they could sell it at wholesale to another lumber retailer. But our most successful ones they can sell that directly at retail prices. And so the more they salvage, the more they can sell, the more money they make, the more they can lower their bids for deconstruction and offset those additional labor costs. So it's I think very rarely does the tax deduction come into play here. Now I know that's different. I know that's different for Anna. That's different in the Bay Area. It's almost, you know, Palo Alto. That's all completely dependent on that tax deductible receipt.
Yeah, we rely a lot on the nonprofits and selling the tax deductions because it's one of the top 3 questions I get is, okay, so how am I supposed to pay for that? So I love what they're doing in Portland, and I hope we get there, that we can make our service a little more affordable. I'd say we are more, we can come in and do a kitchen and bath removal just as fast as a demo company, but taking down a house is something different. So we rely mostly on nonprofits, and then we also just got a grant to open a warehouse in Culver City. So we started to rent that, and we're starting to collect reclaimed lumber and flooring material that maybe the nonprofit won't take because it has nails in it, but we can put in the time to de-nail it and then sell it. So I'm happy to hear that contractors are doing it in Portland, and hopefully we can set up another end market in Denver.
Yeah, most definitely. And I saw, Shawn, that you partially, if not fully, responded to this question about the code references that allow the structural reuse of salvaged wood.
Yeah, and I'm gonna more completely answer it right now.
Okay, great.
If I look distracted, it's because I'm like over here like Googling stuff.
Problem solving for us.
Yeah, so there's the residential code citation. There's also one that's very similar to it in the commercial code. And then Washington State has one. I don't know the code citation for it, but similar.
Great. Appreciate that.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
I would like to ask another question if possible.
Yeah.
So like from Shawn, like Anna and Shawn, like it came like the Shawn, Anna's business model and what is happening in Portland and what is like how the market is speeding up. Like, what do you think, like kind of like chicken and egg, like what do you think, like to make this happen at a bigger scale, what needs to happen first? Like code needs to happen first, like subcontractors that do the construction be available, warehouse to keep the retail, like all together, like what is like the order of things that you see that it would be the best feasible and logical way from your experience?
I can, so in Portland, we were able, so I don't know, the chicken or the egg was already there. Like we already had a demand for salvage material. It's part of our design aesthetic. Like I said earlier, it's hard to go into a bar or a coffee shop and not see this stuff showcased. So it's our vernacular, and we enjoyed that going into this. So we already had used building material, warehouses, nonprofits, boutique retailers of salvaged lumber. And so then we did an ordinance requiring deconstruction. Places like San Francisco, they want to adopt a deconstruction ordinance, but they know they've got a demand issue. So they're trying to figure out the infrastructure to supply that, or to house that material, and then a demand for that material. So they're doing that first, and then they're going to adopt a deconstruction ordinance. And because the real estate's so expensive in San Francisco and Bay Area, their initial focus is on developing an online marketplace for materials. So have that fully set up and baked, start to promote that, and then require deconstruction. So in a perfect world, and I would say this even for Portland, you'd have a deconstruction ordinance that requires deconstruction. You've got this built-in supply of materials, consistent supply. And if you don't have a really robust demand for that material, have some sort of complementary requirement in code that either heavily incentivizes or requires salvage material in new constructions or remodels, so that it kind of closes the loop. I think politically that might be hard. I mean, we were really fortunate to have the kind of political wind in our sails to get a deconstruction ordinance through. I mean, it feels a lot like an obstacle course that we were able to get through, and now we tell people all the tricks to get through to the other side. But had it been a kind of a twofer with deconstruction ordinance and then a reuse requirement or large incentive, that might have been too much to bite off. But in an ideal world, that's what there would be.
Yeah, and in our last minute, I thought I'd throw something similar over to Anna. As a business owner in this world in Colorado, what would you like to see either at the city level or the state level to help incentivize people to use deconstruction?
I'd love to see the permitting fast-tracked for deconstruction. And then I'm currently struggling with the city of Denver right now. I'm licensed everywhere but Denver, and they're not valuing my deconstruction experience from the last several years so I can get the certificate. So actually fast tracking permits. So giving us or even incentivizing, giving people, you can pay less for the permit if you deconstruct or recycle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and ideally should be easy, but we don't see it enough.
Yeah.
Well, I know that the both of you said that if folks had them, we could stick around for 5 or so more minutes, but I wanted to just first say thank you so much to Anna and Shawn for all your time here. I hope this was useful for everyone, and I also just wanted to thank the folks in our membership in Colorado here for showing up and being a part of this. So give your digital round of applause to Anna and Shawn. See if I can find my emoticon. There we go. But yeah, if the two of you have 5 more minutes, we can stick around and see if anyone else has more questions. And if not, let everyone go.
Hey, I'll share a little bit. As I've gotten to know Anna here. Anna, are you okay? I share this story.
Yeah.
So I'm an architectural designer here in Colorado, design with earth and masonry. And so a lot of my clients are already, totally into low carbon and natural materials. And so in learning about Anna and her deconstruction, she's got some really great products, that come down. And so I guess to offset some of the, the difficulty donating and kind of feedback, I've been able to purchase some of these materials from her. And because I have the space, I can store them and then plan for them in my designs that I'm putting together for my clients and, for these houses. So it's really, it's kind of, I've heard the word, some of this work as a designer is kind of serendipitous about what you get, and really takes a close look at, having an inventory and then really planning for those materials into the designs. So once you kind of know what you have, from a deconstruction inventory point of view, then you can kind of utilize it. So I'm really excited to do this and offer it to my clients and kind of have, some, ability to kind of find these materials as well as she's taking them down here locally. So I'm just really excited about the opportunity and happy that she's here local for me.
So Lisa, I've got to share with you, I was in a webinar, I don't know, last fall, and I wish I would have written down who said this, but I keep repeating it, is instead of like form follows function, it's form follows availability. And so it's like, what's available, what is Anna pulling off her sites, and that informs your designs and the materials you use.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have some wood flooring. I've got some concrete tiles. I've got a whole window and door package. And so it's kind of like, well, I want to have not 5 doors from here, have them be mismatched, but how can I, kind of create this
Exactly.
kind of fun. I think it's super fun. It kind of resonates well. And fortunately, my clients too, because really I'm able to offer these things at such a reduced cost than what they buy them new for. So yeah, I like
the
that.
design process a lot more interesting too.
It does make it interesting. Yeah.
Are there resources out there for seeing when deconstruction is happening and what's coming off job sites? I mean, more formally, I mean, you guys kind of have a relationship, so you're just kind of, what's coming off, or you're communicating that directly. But are there resources or websites for Colorado that kind of show like, hey, this building's being torn down and this is what's available? Because that's actually one of the number one questions our designers say is, how do we find out about buildings coming down and what we can use? Because often when we have heard about stuff, we have actually put it in our commercial buildings, but usually it's like the city is taking down a building, they're constructing a building, and they're making the connection. They're like, hey, we're taking down this building and we're building this building, let's connect. But otherwise we're not hearing about the opportunities.
We don't have anything for Colorado, but there's Recapture It. There's a couple national websites that are trying to get going. I'm struggling with that right now, trying to figure it out. And Lisa and I is very patient as we're like, how do we, get blueprints from the house to show you what the material is that's here. There's a lot of grant money available through the Forward grant. If you know anybody who can take it on, there's money to help with that sort of program. I right now we use Facebook Marketplace. So I try to take pictures of things that are installed, and then I take pictures of them when they've been removed, and we're just messaging people that way. But yeah, I'm all ears for any help on any of that.
Thanks, Anna, like marketing the fact that now you have this warehouse and that architects or building homeowners can come and kind of walk through and say, okay, what's, what size things do you have? What do you have? And shop during their conceptual design phase.
Yeah.
Advertise. Yeah. If you were to open your doors that way, store. Yeah.
There's earlier I shared that picture of that resawn plywood that's cross laminated into panels that you can use for furniture, countertops. That same company is so this isn't necessarily deconstruction, but it's still construction material waste related. She's taking excess lumber, cutoffs from new construction, and she accepts those in her facility, and then she cuts them down to standard lengths, like for blocking in new construction, or window headers, anything where there's like short pieces of wood that are required in new construction. On the job sites that she's receiving this material from, that material usually just gets chipped up as hog fuel for energy recovery. But she's able to process it, band it, palletize it, and then provide that as part of a framing package to builders here in town. That's really starting to take off. I think it's a unique way to start to capture those little pieces of lumber that would otherwise not be worth salvaging, because usually you think like, oh, I need 4 foot or longer to really do something, but she's literally banding up like 14-inch pieces to use as blocking and 16-inch on center framing.
What'd you say her name is?
It's Valerie Carey with Sankofa Lumber.
Cool.
And another thing I was going to mention is that, Resource in Boulder does like I would say they do like a moderately good job of advertising what they have. But I think that, like kind of one interesting thing is that, Resource exists. A lot of the materials are cheaper than you could get them at retail. So there are people who are just like hawks on Resource. They're showing up every day or calling to see what high value materials there are. So if there's something really good, it's almost impossible to get dimensioned lumber there anymore because it's gone as soon as it hits the shelf, which is great. And that's why we need, more warehouses like that, what you're talking about doing as well, Anna. And it's kind of interesting because there's not an insane amount of demand for those materials, but there's enough that it flies off the shelves. So I think if there was more supply, Resource would need to do better at advertising, or maybe have a website with inventory, but they don't really need to, because sending an email out once a week with like 10 weird items that they just hope someone is looking for is enough, because the in-demand items are going to fly off their shelf. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting, Anna, that you said that the Ford Foundation or the Ford grant, would support things like that. Cause I'm thinking like, am I good enough at coding to make like some kind of a marketplace? Cause you shouldn't have to use Facebook Marketplace to sell that stuff.
Right.
I hope it's successful.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not, it doesn't feel like a scalable business solution right now using Facebook Marketplace. It's a stopgap. But yeah, the Ford is the Front Range Waste Diversion Grant, and it's created from the increased tipping fees from Governor Polis. So they've got about $70 million, and not enough people are applying. And it's just to any sort of recycling, to help improve recycling infrastructure throughout Colorado.
Very
So
cool.
I mentioned earlier, San Francisco is developing an online marketplace, and so they're working with an organization called Reaply, RHEAPLY, out of Chicago, and they got, I think, a change making grant or something like that that has allowed them to start to develop that platform with Reaply. And so there's a fair amount of interest along the West Coast, at least, about how do we tap into that and be a broader regional resource. So if somebody in San Francisco needs X number of lumber, there's multiple entities that can fill that order, whether that's from here or Seattle or BC.
Anna, what did you say the name of that was that Ford standed for? Front Range?
Front Range Waste Diversion Grant. I'll send the link.
It'd be really interesting to check. This is something I'm definitely passionate about, and I have to say it's actually tempting to look at that. Not that I necessarily know what I would do with it, but it's something I would love to tackle.
Yeah, feel free
So
to reach out to me if you
yeah.
look into it and want to develop any ideas.
yeah. Okay.
I know we've gone about 10 minutes over. Anything else you all wanted to chat about? I really appreciate you staying late.
I was just gonna tell you, Alexis, I put in the chat the link for the Boulder County C&D resource list, and it has concrete recyclers on there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.